Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this November 29th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time. They also play the show at 11 a.m., and if you can't get it there, go to my long-standing website at arcticbeacon.com. That's arcticbeacon.com. And you can get shows going back over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. And today we're going to take a trip back to Rome, Italy, a place that I hold dear to my heart as I lived there for almost 7 years during the 80s and covered some interesting stories. And I have so many memories there that every time I bring Leo Zagami on my show, I almost feel like I'm back in Italy. But Leo, we've got some things going on that are very strange there. The immigration problem I know we've touched upon, and I want to update our listeners on that. But we have a referendum coming up there, which to me is quite strange. It's almost as if your leader, Renzi, who runs your country, wants to become a dictator. Your thoughts?
Well, yes. I mean, he wants to completely change the constitution. Let's remember that no government up until now in the recent history of Italy, but even in the early history of Italy, has ever even thought about putting their hands in this way on the constitution, because the constitution is a bit regarded like a sort of Bible of the Italian Republic. And Matteo Renzi instead wants to change a lot of these voices, a lot of these important rules and laws that make our society, of course, democratic, because he wants to erase basically the Senate, making it impossible for people to elect directly a senator, and while instead they would be replaced by these senators that are just put there as an honorary kind of position, and others who will be instead the mayors and governors of most regions. So it's a little bit like transforming Italy in the German kind of way, where you have the lands, where you have the various representatives of the lands. So I think that what's happening here is that Angela Merkel and those people who have really created this situation here in Europe, where Germany is becoming richer and richer every day and the rest of Europe is becoming poorer and poorer every day, is reflecting on the choices of Matteo Renzi for this referendum. That's why, that's why a lot of political leaders have spoken against him, and he's really having a big crisis in the last 7 days. I mean, I'm talking here about even people in his own party. Some say that even his wife will not vote in favor of this referendum, the yes vote. So, I mean, that's quite incredible that he doesn't have even his wife on his side. But Matteo Renzi is definitely in a moment of crisis, also because of his position before the American elections. He supported completely Hillary Clinton. He went, as you know, in the U.S., was with Obama. He was really assuming a sort of, official stand that he shouldn't have, because no head of state should ever support a candidate or the other and get involved in the political elections of another state. It's against the basic rules of diplomacy.
Now, I wanted to ask you, though, has there been some information that's come out that somehow he has donated to the Clinton Foundation?
Yeah, another thing that has come out in the newspapers that has shocked many people is that the Italian Ministry of the Ambiente, which is basically the one in charge of a sort of green ministry, a ministry of the... How you will translate the Ministry of Ambiente, Greg? You probably know a better word for it, but it's a little bit like the Green Party ministry kind of thing,
Okay.
And because they take care, of course, of fighting the pollution and a lot of other things.
Well, you're probably talking about the environment, the environmental control.
Yeah. Let's say it's a sort of Ministry of Environment. Yeah, it's a Ministry of Environment. And for some reason, this Ministry of Environment has donated huge amounts of money without really going through the parliament, so without any democratic decision being made, to the Clinton Foundation during the political campaign. This has been done in Italy, but I know that the similar scandal also surfaced last month in Norway, where a huge amount of money was also poured from the Norwegian state into the pockets of the Clintons. This is, of course, completely anti-democratic, and it really puzzles me how nobody is doing anything to really go down to the bottom of it. It's a bit of a disappointment, definitely, that Trump hasn't and doesn't want to perceive and persecute, of course, Hillary, because I think that most Americans will like to see Hillary prosecuted. Don't you think, Greg?
Yeah, I do, and he's kind of he hasn't changed his tune publicly, but some of his aides, after Hillary Clinton decided to get on this recount, I don't know if you've heard about this here, she decided to jump on the back of Jill Stein, who was the head.
Jill Stein, of course, is sponsored by George Soros.
Exactly.
One thing that I might think the connection there with the Ministry of Environment in Italy, and I was talking about, the Green Party and all that. I mean, the Ministry of Environment in Italy has always been particularly connected to also politically what George Soros has always been pushing, because George Soros has always been behind most Green parties worldwide. So I would say that this recount is a little bit like George Soros' last attempt to disrupt Donald Trump's work.
Well, of course, but I wanted to mention this just for your information, that after Hillary Clinton decided to support this recount, which is going to go nowhere, one of Trump's advisors came on TV the other day and stated that when Jeff Sessions takes over in the Department of Justice, that he's going to allow Sessions to go forward, and if Sessions comes up with some information, which of course he will, he's not ruling out prosecution now.
Well, I think that there is definitely a will for Trump to be diplomatic in certain quarters about not wanting to hurt too much the Clintons. But of course, I mean, they are such criminals that, I mean, it's really pointless to defend them, because they have to go down. And also because I think that Trump himself needs to realize that his enemy is still out there. I mean, George Soros is after him. He has sent people in the street against him. He probably is plotting something else against him, just while we talk. So, I mean, why being clement or why forgiving Hillary when you know that she's part of the problem with Obama and with everybody else, all the liberals who are, of course, controlled by George Soros. And this is happening also in Europe. Now, the situation in Europe, though, I tell you, Greg, if, as many people think, Matteo Renzi will lose, let's remember that this referendum was mentioned also by Obama. He actually went, you remember when Obama was there with him in the front of the White House and delivered the speech with him? He actually got him to support the yes vote. So that was done pretty openly, and if he loses, then they will have to kick him out. That means that probably at that point there will be some technical government shaped up with the approval of the presidency, but that will not stop the people from gathering in the streets and asking for re-election. In that case, France is already aligning with the center-right, with Fillon, and probably also Le Pen has a very good chance also in France. We have, of course, what's happened with the Brexit. That was a little bit similar to what's going to happen with the referendum in Italy. Understand, Greg? Because it's not really a referendum about Renzi, but even the Brexit wasn't a referendum about Cameron. But he had to leave the day after he failed. Because,
so basically, the people of Italy want out of the EU, don't they?
People of Italy are increasingly getting annoyed with the way the EU doesn't in any way tackle the immigration problem. They say a lot of good things about it. They say they will take in immigrants, but then when they arrive at the borders with France, they get sent back to Italy. And this means that we are flooded with hundreds of thousands of immigrants arriving from Northern Africa, And I tell you, most of them are not Syrians, have nothing to do with the wars that are going on. They come from parts of Africa which actually, to embark in a journey like that, you need to be a little bit wealthy. So these people are not even that poor. Or they actually took a loan, which means they will come into Europe as slaves.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's
and what is Renzi's position?
Renzi's position has been in the last, since he went into power in 2014, to just let them in and to actually support and actually even nearly going to pick them up in Africa with using our boats, our naval boats, like some kind of rescue squad for all these desperates who are in the middle. You know, you just need to basically take a gommone, how you say, one of those things you can inflate with air, put them, in the water.
Lifeboats, yeah.
Yeah, just a lifeboat. You go 12 kilometers off the coast, and by that point, if you arrive out of Libyan territorial waters, they will pick you up. So it's not a big deal to do 20 kilometers with that kind of boat, even if it's the middle of, also because you have to understand that the Mediterranean is not the Atlantic, so it doesn't have the same kind of waves, if you do this kind of thing in the Atlantic, after 5 kilometers you will be sinking. But in the Mediterranean, you a lot of the time you find a sea that permits, and especially in Sicily, the weather is always good, and it's very rare that the weather gets.
Are you there?
Africa. So we have probably the Africa from our coast is Lampedusa. It's like 90 kilometers away. That's not a big, it's not a big amount of kilometers from Africa to Sicily. So I think that now that we are flooded by these immigrants, the other thing that is really annoying Italians is that Renzi has made business out of it together with the Vatican. Matteo Renzi is a Jesuit-trained agent. He goes every summer in Sardinia to this Father Deida, and he goes to this community with his wife, and they recite the Ignazio Loyola's prayers. They stand there, and he has supported with this Boldrini, who is this other politician, this woman who used to work for the UN, and she's absolutely ghastly person, and she's encouraging, and the same thing has been done also by Pope Francis, who has encouraged these immigrants by going to Lampedusa and basically saying the doors are open, pour in.
Yeah, so you have a country with no borders now, thanks to the Pope and and Renzi, right?
Yes, the Pope and Renzi have ruined this country. The Pope is increasingly having, as we said in the last episode, problems within his own church, especially from the traditional and the conservative part of the church, but also from ordinary citizens that really are fed up with this rhetoric of the Pope Francis, who says, don't build walls. And he has the biggest walls in the Vatican, the biggest walls ever. He doesn't let anybody in. But still, he says, open, we build bridges. I don't see any bridges in the Vatican, guys. If you arrive to the Vatican wall and if you try to get over the wall, they will shoot you. So, there is no bridges in the Vatican. And nobody has ever attempted to ever get even in the Vatican as a foreigner because you get shot. There is the Swiss guards who have ordered to shoot. So, it's not like they are the most friendly nation in the world. And they are probably, I think the Vatican counts around 900 citizens. And they are wealthy, they are privileged, and they, of course, symbolically, he has taken one single family, one of immigrants.
You know something, so we have the hundreds of thousands of people pouring into Italy.
Yeah.
Have the Italian people become wise to the fact that the Jesuits, along with the leaders of, let's say, the CIA, Mossad, and other places are actually funding ISIS? And have you seen ISIS in your country?
The good thing about ISIS in Italy is that they will never do a terrorist attack until it's not absolutely necessary, because they buy weapons from Italy. They get their weapons shipped in Gioia Tauro, in the south of Italy. You remember George Ugo Balestrieri?
Yes.
There was, when we covered George Ugo Balestrieri, he was still living in New York, Later on, he was involved with a big scandal at the port of Gioia Tauro involving weapons, involving stuff from China, and involved in connections that go all the way to the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And now it seems that there is involved also ISIS. So this big port, one of the biggest ports in the world, which is in Gioia Tauro, it's held completely in the hands by the 'Ndrangheta, which is the local Calabrian mafia. And that's why there is a secret deal between the Calabrian mafia and ISIS, and for that reason we have not been attacked yet. That's the simple reason. The interesting thing was to see at the end of this holy year, this jubileum that the Pope had indicted, had basically promoted as the ultimate pilgrimage, that you have to pass through this door and all your sins will be forgiven. Not many people really went, but of course the Vatican had to say it was a great success, and the Ministry of Interior, who is called Angelino Alfano, he said this was the biggest success for Italy. Security is a model for the rest of the world. The model for the rest of the world is simply that ISIS doesn't attack us because we are the mob, and the mob gives them the weapons, and they're scared of the mob because the mob will shoot them. You see, I mean, that is the truth of it, and it's pretty far out. I mean, of course, if you go, sometimes they have interviewed ISIS members, say, why they don't attack in Italy? We are afraid of the mob. I mean, they're afraid of the mob, of course, because they know the mob will go and search for their families, shoot their families, shoot their, I mean, one thing is to kill a normal citizen, innocent citizen, doesn't have weapons, doesn't have a way to get back to you. But to shoot a mobster might get you in serious trouble, as you know, Greg, no?
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting story. Well, one thing I've always wondered, and have you ever thought of this? And I'm sure you have, but knowing.
But there is actually articles in mainstream newspapers a couple of years ago saying that this was the thing. ISIS is scared because we have the mob, and the mob will protect south of Italy from ISIS. They said it in every newspaper in Italy, and they were quite happy to say it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've said it a long time on this show that together with the Jesuits and the New World Order, let's just use that term, their goal is basically to destroy Western civilization here in Europe and also in America. And you can see how it is orchestrated, because my first question was always, how come ISIS doesn't attack China or doesn't attack some of these, you know what I'm talking about? Why? That would, or Russia. Why don't they attack Russia?
No. I tell you what happened once. There was some kind of Muslim terrorist or hope to be terrorist who were in Rome, in this area, which now is pretty much Muslim. It's, I think, on the Casilina. It's an area, I think it's called Tor Pignatara. I mean, it's a pretty rough area. But now it's been taken over. It used to be the Calabrese there and the Sicilians before, and now there is only Muslims. Well, there is also, of course, the Chinese. And it happened that a couple of these Muslims went into a Chinese, some kind of Chinese shop. They attacked this Chinese shop, and they got some money out of this Chinese. What happened a couple of days later was pretty fascinating. This Chinese, basically the Chinese guy, I think, was killed, but the Muslims were killed in the most atrocious way. And they were found with their head upside down. And I tell you, the Chinese, they don't really care about the laws of the state. They have their own laws. And if ISIS got in their business, well, the Chinese mob is 100 million times superior. They showed it in Rome. Nobody could believe it. Everybody was laughing, even the Italian police, when they saw what happened, because say, okay, the Chinese did their own, justice. We don't need to intervene now. I mean, that's how it is with Chinese. You don't mess with Chinese. They're very powerful.
Now, the question I have, in London, there's been news reports, that there's Sharia courts operating there. Do you think that's happening in Rome?
While I tell you that here the situation is still not as bad as in France, probably, where I think they have Sharia courts, and I think they have, even if that's been forbidden, Italian areas where the Muslims are basically there. It's possible that Sharia is in place in a covert way. They tried now to number and to basically make a rule from the state that each mosque needs to have a kind of license in order to stay open, but it seems like this law is not really being respected that much. The Boldrini-Renzi immigrant policy, together with Pope Francis, gave these immigrants a chance to really do things that the Italians can't do. For example, they can open a fruttivendolo selling fruit 24 hours a day for 6 months a year without paying any tax, just by opening some kind of cultural association. And then by the end of the year, they simply switch over, go bankrupt, or declare that this basically association is closed, and then they can start again with another name and another group of people, and they pass on these places from one to the other. So now, even where I am, which is like an hour from Rome now at the moment, you have 10 minutes from where I live, an Arab place where they sell fruit at very cheap prices, nearly 24 hours a day, full of Muslims that came out of nowhere in a predominantly Christian setup, but of course nobody really knows what's going on, and nobody really asks many questions, and they definitely don't get the same controls. If you are an Italian and you open a shop like that, after a week you have the Guardia di Finanza, which is basically like having the IRS. You have every check possible from the health and all the rest. If you instead are a Muslim immigrant, you can open anything and nobody says anything, because the Italian laws are facilitating this immigration, and they're very tolerant about what they can do, which is really a bit of a disgrace against Italians. Imagine how Italians now feel when they have their country, which is being taken over. These Muslims are poured in. They are given then 35 euros each by the European Union, and these 35 euros each, they don't go directly to the immigrants. They go either to the Vatican, that has 50% of these immigrant refugee centers, and the party of Matteo Renzi, the Democrat Party. So they have a huge amount of money, and they are basically splitting it up between the Vatican and the Democratic Party. So for them it's business, because they even confiscate houses from people if you're not living there to give them to immigrants, or they rent hotels and they give them to immigrants, because it's an hotel can have basically 100 people staying 360 days a year, 35 euros a day. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, so basically, if you own a house and you leave it vacant for a while, they can steal it from you, right?
This is happening in the big cities. It's not happening so much in the small places, but it's happening in the big cities a lot, because then once they are in, it's very difficult to get them out. But also there is an official thing. These refugee centers are paid by and financed by the European Union through the state, and so they are official. So you see basically all these African guys, these Indian, this whatever, that are Arabs, and most of them, they don't have a job. They are, during the day, they go around trying to make a buck in one way or another, and then in the evening they go back to their centers where they have always a dinner paid. With their money.
Hey, Leo, hold that. We're going to take a break right now. Come back.
Yes, they showed on Italian TV. These people had a villa with swimming pool.
Oh, boy. Hey, we're going to take a break. Back in 3 minutes with Leo Zagami from Rome.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet. or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it: to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, welcome back to the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. My guest is Leo Zagami from Rome, and Leo's been a guest of mine. God, it's been over 10 years we've been talking about this stuff, and it seems to always be pointing towards one direction, the simple thing we talked about, the one world order, the one world government, and that statement, I think, is becoming clearer and clearer to people who really understand how they're doing it now. It's this illegal immigration that's destroying countries, destroying their sovereignty, and bringing in a whole new form of what I call, we discussed this at the break, and we'll get to this in a minute, a changing of the Democratic parties, both in America and Italy. And they seem to mirror one another over the years, and we'll get into that in the second half of this half hour. But I did want to touch on one thing, Leo. Fethullah Gulen, and you have great knowledge on this man and his movement, and I wanted to update you on what's going on here. Lawyers for this Muslim cleric are warning Trump right now not to pressure the judiciary to deport their client to Turkey. After leading Trump's advisors, that was General Flynn, who's the national security advisor for Trump, compared this preacher to Osama bin Laden. And basically, Flynn is calling Fethullah Gulen what he is, and that is a fundamentalist who's brought over Sharia ideas and fundamentalist ideas into all of these schools that have been funded by Clinton and Obama to basically infiltrate our country. and we're paying $150 million a year to this guy. Now he's being protected, and just recently, a couple of weeks ago, Erdogan from Turkey wanted our government to place him under house arrest because they fear he's going to flee the country. Your thoughts on this, because you know who Fethullah Gulen is. Tell us about it, because you learned about him years ago in Norway and what this guy really is all about. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, he's directly connected to the Jesuits. He's been connected for many years with the U.S. intelligence, especially with the Democratic side that helped him in 1999 obtain eventually his residence in the U.S. to escape also persecution in his native Turkey, because in Turkey there is a great opposition to Fethullah Gulen, especially now after he attempted with his thugs to overthrow Erdogan. Now Erdogan is methodically arresting everybody involved with Gulen. It will take some time because there are thousands and thousands, but even if the European Union and those criminals in Brussels, like headed by Juncker and Angela Merkel, has opposed these actions from Erdogan now 2 days ago has basically threatened Europe. He said, okay, you don't want to give me Fethullah Gulen, you don't want to help me out here with this situation. Well, I will open basically the borders with Syria, and I will flood Europe with immigrants if you don't do what I ask you to do. This was only said a couple of days ago, Greg. I don't know if you got this information in the U.S. yet.
No, we didn't. That's good. No.
I mean, it's been a big thing here in the news because basically Erdogan has been very blatant and very clear with Europe. He has said, well, you don't want to act against these people. You want to actually accuse me of being anti-democratic. You want to take away the possibility for Turkey to enter ever the European Union. Well, at this point, I have a card to play. Let's remember that there is 500,000 to 1 million immigrants displaced just at the borders and inside Turkey already, and there is another 2 million at the borders with Syria. So here we're talking about millions of people that if Turkey wanted, they could just say, okay, go through. And at that point, we saw it last year. We saw what happened when the borders got open for a period of time and they flooded Europe and they all went up to Germany. You remember from Syria.
Right.
And amongst them, there was also a lot of terrorists, and amongst them, there were also the terrorists that will attack the Bataclan and France and do what they did also in Brussels and all the rest. I mean, they were not only native of France or Belgium. There were also people that had arrived to support these terrorist attacks from what is the ISIL state. Now, this is really... What's happening also in the last 2 days is unprecedented in regards also to the attack that ISIS did on the borders with Israel and the reaction of Israel, which killed half a dozen ISIS activists. Because there has never been, and of course we want to remind people who are listening that Syria borders with Israel, there had never been an attack directly from ISIS to Israel. Now, it's a little bit of a tricky situation because we don't really know. I mean, a lot of ISIS operatives have been discovered to be in connection with Israel, with their secret services. We know very well that, to some extent, the Mossad has supported the CIA and the NSA and the other agencies that there is 16 agencies that supported the birth of ISIS on the ground from the US. And there is also the Emirates and the Wahhabis that have financed it. The same people who have financed Hillary Clinton. Hillary is heavily financed by these people. She doesn't only go in bed because she's, of course, we know she's a lesbian. Her helper, Huma Aberdeen, is basically an agent, a Saudi agent. And so she literally goes in bed with the enemy. But Hillary Clinton is not going to give up. Hillary Clinton is already thinking of recandidating herself in 2020, which is absolutely ridiculous because she will be ancient as you can get. And she's definitely not, she wasn't well now. Imagine in 4 years. I mean, I don't know. I mean, what are they going to help her with a stick to arrive to the White House? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And I think also that they will in some way try to disrupt more and more Trump because they are really afraid of what will happen after Trump gets in power. Of course, he had to retract on some points. You have to, when you are president of the biggest democracy in the world, you have to, of course, be diplomatic. But I don't think that with General Flynn or with the other advisors that he has chosen, he will retract on his position also with Russia, which means that this idiotic war that was going on, this war that Hillary Clinton and Obama started against Vladimir Putin, because they were the people who started, together with George Soros, who financed those thugs, those criminals in Ukraine, as you know. I think that there is no future for that kind of thing. Ukraine is, of course, a nation that traditionally has been part of the Russian Empire, not even, a colony, part.
Well, you know something, with your struggles with Renzi in December, and America here, there's stories coming out of the December surprise by Obama and Soros, and the thought is that they're going to try everything possible to keep him from taking power. It's similar to what's going on in your country. Talk about the similarities.
Yeah. There's a lot of similarities in the way also, like you described earlier to me, both in private and also here on the show, how your reality is changing around you, how the reality of everybody in every U.S. city is changing because these Muslims are poured in, and Obama is doing this up until the last minute of his presidency, polluting the tranquil society of America with these Muslims who are a cancer. They will be a cancer, and they will be a constant cancer. They will not be able, you will not be able to get rid of them once they're there. You will not be able to get rid of them. That means, basically, that you have, there is only one way of getting rid of them. And this is, of course, a way that is anti-democratic, but in the end might even be the ultimate, the last possibility that America has to preserve their democracy on the long run.
Yep, and I think a good example is Fethullah Gulen is a good start. There's the mainstream media still depicts him as a moderate Muslim.
No, well, he depicts himself as a moderate Muslim. I've talked about him very much in my book that came out in the US, Volume 1 of my Confessions. I also talked about him again, about my personal experience with the Gulen movement in Volume 2 of my Confessions by CCC Publishing.
Yeah, and tell us who he really is.
Well, I mean, from my experience, he's the one who, with my ex-wife, who was part of his sect, has taken my son, who I've never seen again. He's a criminal. He's a guy who is basically has a sect, very dangerous sect. It's a Muslim sect that on the outside promotes itself in the most moderate way so they can achieve acceptance by the so-called liberals. They have all these schools, which have become an excellent way to pour money into Fethullah Gulen's pockets, and at the same time also to support intelligence gathering operations. U.S. intelligence networks have, unfortunately, have used Fethullah Gulen's schools also in the Caucasic regions, and unfortunately they have, basically the CIA feels in debt with Fethullah Gulen for some of these operations. So that is the big problem that General Flint might have going after Gulen. We know that Donald Trump has had only a couple of real security intelligence briefings since he has installed himself in the White House. He seems to be a little bit negligent yet into wanting to take on the daily briefings that, of course, every U.S. president has to take. I would be very interested in knowing his point of view after he knows the truth about Fethullah Gulen. I think that Going after Fethullah Gulen is basically going after the enemy, because Gulen is connected with Saudi Arabia, with the caliphate idea that is promoted in a more, let's say, warmonger way battered by ISIS, but he represents the intellectual way. He's a bit like a Trojan horse that you put inside the society because he, without really feeling threatened by it, because he preaches to his followers to not do the same things ISIS does, to behave in a completely opposite way in front of the people. Then only when they have their own secret meetings, you see, they are divided in 7 levels. They have only the first 3 levels really know what's going on. And I think that you have to understand these first 3 levels are where when I was involved with them. Unfortunately, I witnessed the first 2 levels, and I saw that they had nothing to do with religion. They had a lot to do with intelligence gatherings, with establishing this cult above all as the future shadow government of Turkey, and probably trying, like then they actually did, to overcome the Erdogan government sooner or later and install their own people. Initially, of course, they would have liked to have done that by giving a moderate idea of their own setup, but then in reality they are a fundamentalist organization within the when you, I mean, I
right.
have this experience, terrible personally, because you see, when I encountered the Fethullah Gulen movement, I truly believed the first few months that I was in front of people who were truly moderate. So I was actually myself let down when I discovered there was completely something else. When they told me, Leo, you have to have one of our clerics coming every Wednesday to teach you the ways of the Quran, to teach you how to pray, you have to go every Friday to mosque. When I went to Turkey, I actually ended up once in Konya, in one of the main cities, who is also the city of birth of Jalaluddin Rumi, going to mosque on a Friday with the Gulen movement activists, and next to me praying in front, I was actually put like, when you are a special guest in the mosque, you are put in front to pray, no? And I found myself next to the head of the police, and he was also Gulen movement. And so for Erdogan now, having all these infiltrators is not easy, because of course he has to get them one by one, and he's doing a great job. The only one who have supported the work, as I said, of Erdogan against Gulen has always been Russia, because Russia felt threatened from the start from the Gulen movement. The moment the Soviet Union went down, Fethullah Gulen immediately trying to infiltrate all the Muslim areas of the ex-Soviet Union.
Exactly. I wanted to also make a point regarding your personal knowledge of the Jesuit connection to Fethullah Gulen and the ISIS movement, so to speak, Sharia law, etc. Tell us about that, just to remind our listeners here how the Jesuits really operate. Go ahead.
Well, another thing is that, Gulen is quite open about his connection with the Jesuits, because, one of his main books, Towards a Civilization of Peace and Tolerance, has a preface, a foreword written by Thomas Michel, who used to be the head of the Interreligious Dialogue of the Jesuits. He has been also very open in support of Thomas Michel being present at the apex of his organization. And Thomas Michel was clearly participating in some way after he left the Secretary of Interreligious Dialogue of the Jesuits in Izmir for the last 3 years, trying to prepare this coup that fortunately failed. So I think that the Jesuits have influenced deeply also the way Gulen runs these schools. The Jesuits are the ones who have really done a lot by always having their schools and the universities in the right place and training the right people in society to control the rest of society. I have dedicated a whole chapter in volume 1 of my Confessions, where I show how a lot of CIA operatives get trained in Jesuit universities. So I think that the modality that Gulen is doing within the Muslim world is just duplicating the Jesuit modality, which is a little bit ambivalent, a little bit, it's very difficult to detect from the outside. And in the end, he was winning. Now he's risking a lot now with Trump there in General Flynn.
Well, you know,
they are saying...
You know, I have to bring this up because it's so important. You know, the Jesuits like to play both sides of the fence. And just recently, Fidel Castro passed away, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah,
and
of course, Fidel Castro.
Now listen to this. Even the mainstream media here made a point to say he was Jesuit trained. Now, doesn't that tell you something?
Well, the mainstream media also said how important the Vatican was to reestablish the relations between Obama and Cuba. And this was, and actually they were also very open in saying how sad Pope Francis has been about the death of his friend Fidel Castro. Let's remember also that the brother of Fidel Castro, who is in charge at the moment of Cuba, when the Pope met him, he said not only he was, a Jesuit student, but he felt like a Jesuit. So you see, the Jesuits in Cuba, they managed to conduct their business together with a certain kind of Freemasonry in Cuba, which made Fidel Castro 33-degree Freemason, just like Che Guevara was just before the revolution. That kind of Freemasonry was never persecuted in Cuba and strived, and basically during the whole period of communism up until now, without ever being persecuted, because the Jesuits didn't feel there was a need to close that form of Freemasonry down, because they could use it themselves. There were a lot of Jesuits, and they are still now a lot of Jesuits in Masonic lodges in Cuba.
Yeah, and I mean, here we go, Jesuits involved in, well, let's go to another priest you're aware of, Father Del Oglio, right? And his connection to ISIS. Tell us a little bit about him.
Disappeared officially from the radar 3 years ago. The Italian government made some announcements before he was dead, then he was alive, then he was in the hands of ISIS, and then in the end, they just gave up on him, strangely enough. And instead, the information that comes from the ground is basically that Father Del Oglio joined ISIS and became basically a training professor in what is the Academy of Evil. and there was also a very interesting story by another Jesuit who was in their hands, and he actually went out of this whole thing. He came back to Europe, he talked to I think he was an Italian, and he said that they never treat him badly there, because they knew he was a holy man. And that's how ISIS treats Jesuits as holy men. I mean, imagine that. I mean,
yeah, and Father Del Oglio.
ISIS is pretty evil, and Jesuits are pretty evil. So I guess between the two evils, they really meet up and love each other.
Yeah, now this Jesuit priest we're talking about was an expert in Syrian affairs. He spoke the language. He worked with ISIS, and in fact, I believe he was a connection to the money and the arms that were trying to make sure it was getting to the right people, don't you think?
You mean Father Del Oglio?
Yeah.
Father Del Oglio, I mean, it's very strange that apart from being for many years in Syria a very important leader of the Christian community, he has always been very close to the Muslim community. A bit like Thomas Michel, he kind of wanted to bring in this syncretistic Chrislam, no? This link between Christianity and Islam. And I think that, like we said 10 years ago, nearly 10 years ago, Greg, when in 2007, I think we started discussing the fact that there was a lot of cardinals that secretly converted to Islam in the Vatican, and that there was also the Jesuits who were very close to Islam. And so that's where it's all going. A lot of these Jesuits have actually converted to Islam because they think that Islam is the religion of the future. It's the one which has more power at the moment, is the one that pays better than mercenaries. So I think that the Chrislam operation is functioning very well. I mean, we have seen how in Italy for the first time Muslims have been accepted in churches, have celebrated Mass together with... There was even priests giving the Eucharist to the Muslims in church. I mean, it was unheard of, unseen. But I mean, we have even witnessed that last year. So I think that personally, we are in a situation with Pope Francis that probably... I think that Matteo Renzi will resign here in Italy, but soon after, probably next year, Pope Francis will join him too. Because Pope Francis will not be able to stand the pressure that Cardinal Burke and also the USA intelligence is putting on him. Because the US intelligence has a lot to say when it comes down to affairs in the Vatican. And there is a whole department of the CIA operating in the Vatican. I published in my book, Pope Francis, the Last Pope, a list of heads of division of the CIA in the Vatican, an official list that was unpublished before in the English language, just to show that there is this link. So imagine once Trump is installed as president, things will have to change even in the Vatican. They will have to change in the Vatican, they will have to change in the politics of all the various governments in Europe, in South America, and so on. We will see a lot of changes, Greg, because as your experience showed you back in the days in Italy, the embassy, once they install a new president, the ambassador change, and the whole setup of the embassy changes, also with contacts and what they do after that.
Exactly. You know, Leo, we're all out of time here, and I just wanted to mention that we're going to have, if you're available, let's come on next Monday again. I want to continue with this, and we have just touched the surface of the Jesuit connections to really what's going on in our country, your country, and I think we should remind people.
Jesuits will continue to promote Hillary, and Hillary is not gone. This nightmare of Hillary
I
is
know.
still,
Right.
still on top of us.
Okay, we're all out of time. Leo, we'll see you next week, okay?
Take care, Greg. God bless America.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.